The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a Standard Bank webinar hosted by SPFC, Standard Bank Financial Consultancy. My name is Katie Wegunene. I'm the coordinator for today's session. I've got two presenters today that are going to be addressing our topic, which is how you as a South African investor can diversify your risk offshore in order to meet your lifestyle goals. So as I said, we've got two presenters. The first presenter of the day is Greg Golla. He is the Head of Business Development and Channel Support for Standard Bank Wealth, Investment and Fiduciary Services. Prior to this, he was Portfolio Manager and Head of Institutional Distribution at Melville Douglas Investment Managers. He has been with the bank for 7 years, having spent 3 years as Head of CIB coverage for non-presence countries, and prior to that, Chief Risk Officer for Standard Bank Corporate and Investment Bank Africa. Greg is a CA, CFA, and holds certificate in quantitative modeling. Very impressive. And his co-pilot for the day, or co-presenter, is the infamous Errol Meyer, our go-to guy for financial planning. As you know, he's a certified financial planner and an admitted advocate of the High Court SA. He holds qualifications in finance, law, teaching, and taxation. Has written many tax and financial planning related articles, newsletters, and study materials for corporates, financial institutions, and universities. He's even authored a book. And he previously worked as a tax advocate for SARS and currently holds the position of Senior Manager of Advisory Propositions at Standard Bank. I always tell you only have the best for you. That's why these guys are in the room for us doing the presentation. Before I hand over to the two esteemed gentlemen, I just want to do two housekeeping things with you. First thing, I'd like to check that everybody can hear me and can see the first screen on their computers. So if you don't mind, there's a small panel on your right-hand side on the screen. There's a small high five, a little hand with 5 fingers there. If you can hear me and can see that first screen, please just click on that small high five. This will alert me that you can see and hear me. Thank you. I see some hands coming up. Thank you, Orion, Arnoldus, Brian, Carol, Casper. Thank you, David, Ethna, Gustav, John, Louis, Sanjeev, Shirley. Okay, majority. Thank you, Dumi. Thank you, Trevor Grace. I see majority of the hands are coming up. I really appreciate that. I assume the sound is great on your side. If the sound is a bit soft, what you want to do is on your taskbar, just increase the volume there of your speaker so you can hear us a bit clearer. That should help. Second housekeeping factor that I want to run through is questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, you may type your questions in. There's a small questions box on that same panel on the right-hand side. You type in the question, we'll be able to see it immediately. But what we'll do is we don't want to disturb the presenters. So at the end of the presentation, then we'll address the questions to Greg and Errol, and then they can give you the appropriate answers. Okay, I hope this is clear. This session is recorded, so our planners and our internal staff members can see it afterwards. And for our customers as well, we'll post it on the YouTube channel for you to see. Okay, I hope everything is clear. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over the reins to the two gentlemen in the room. Errol Meyer is going to start for us, and then Greg is going to take over from him, and then they can start. Mr. Errol Meyer, thank you very much for your time. Greg, thank you as well. I'm going to hand over to you right now to start your side of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Katiwa, for that. Well, good day to all of you and welcome to our webinar. Well, there you see the slide. The contents that we are going to discuss is goals-based financial planning, investment fundamentals, and how to build that offshore portfolio. Those of you who attended last time will recall that we dealt with a local portfolio. Well, today we will start off by briefly capturing the basic fundamentals of goals-based financial planning so that we have a clear understanding why it's necessary to understand goals-based offshore investing. Thereafter, we will revisit some investment fundamentals and in particular focus on investing offshore, but always adhering to the goals-based financial planning philosophy. Finally, we will do some practical examples of goal-based financial planning, embedding the offshore goals-based financial planning philosophy. So if we would go to the next slide, let us then refresh our memories why we are investing. I haven't seen this slide, and there we go. Have a look at the slide and see the different role players and particular note with the roles that they play. Goal-based financial planning is a financial planning philosophy that puts the client's needs first. Now, the financial planning process is kicked off with the guidance of a financial planner who's responsible for determining the client's unique lifestyle choices and, stated differently, needs, and then defining them as goals. And in the industry, we often hear about the words financial needs analysis. And that financial needs analysis, more than just taking the assets and liabilities, it actually incorporates understanding those goals and quantifying them. Now, typical goals may be some of the following. It may be financial independence, to have funds to start a small business, as a second career, to retire, to save for my children's education, save for a wedding, a deep-sea fishing vessel, or to go on overseas holiday. And so we know that every client is unique and some goals will receive a greater priority than others. So stated differently, goal-based financial planning is about each client's unique set of lifestyle goals whilst balancing creating value and giving purpose to that client's wealth. Now, in order to give purpose to these goals, the financial planner will have to calculate the amount needed, taking inflation into consideration, and then build an investment strategy for each goal, simply because one may have limited resources to create value, such as my income earning structure or my investments. Now, each goal has a different time frame, and some are just not as important as others. And time frame is an important consideration from investment and a financial planning perspective. Now, to give effect to these lifestyle goals, an investment strategy must be put together to ensure that these goals can be realized in the future. Well, it's simply not good enough to aim for the highest return on an investment asset class without having a regard to the term that is needed and how important it is not to miss a goal. This is where investment planning and financial planning come together. So for that reason, we have to devise a tailor-made investment strategy for each goal. So far, so good. This is familiar. But now, and this is what this is all about today, what if we have offshore goals? For instance, I want to purchase a house in Mauritius, or I want to send my children to a school in the United Kingdom. The question now is, should I make use of local funds? Should I make use of an asset swap where I have offshore exposure? Or should I invest directly offshore? Also then, will the same taxation rules apply since my funds may be invested in another currency? So one may ask the question, will I be taxed on my currency gains? Well, when we talk about diversification, to lower the risk of a portfolio for a given return, is there a difference then between investing locally and offshore? Is investing offshore only about currency risk, what many people tend to think? Or will the impact of inflation referred to as my number one enemy in financial planning also play a similar or a different role? And this is what we will be discussing in this presentation. So I hand you over to Greg, who will take you through the rest of the presentation and answer those questions or those problem statements that I have articulated. Thank you, Greg. Over to you.
Thank you, Errol. And thank you, everybody, for listening in today. So maybe I can just start off with an obvious comment that we live in a very interesting world. And it is definitely becoming more mobile and global as we go. I think, speaking for myself, but I'm sure I speak for many people in the audience, that we spend as much time wondering if we need to get a second passport, a property offshore, finding a university in the UK or Mauritius for our kids, than planning for our holiday home in KwaZulu-Natal. We have to face the fact that maybe our kids might not be living in the same country in the future for many reasons. And this might even apply to ourselves. So with this in mind, we acknowledge that our lovely country is definitely a small fish in a large ocean. Our equity market only makes up 1% of the global market capitalization, and our GDP is only 0.5% of the world's GDP. It would be fair to say that we should include offshore goals in our planning. So why would we invest offshore? As an opening remark, the world just gives you a much larger investment choice. There are 60 exchanges available on which to trade across the globe with a market value of $69 trillion. And as a consequence, the choice of markets, sectors and instruments is of course immense. So there are also a number of other benefits that of investing offshore that we can link back to the goals-based investing philosophy and link to your goals. The number one in any of these scenarios is diversification. All classes of offshore investments offer a good diversification effect in a South African-based portfolio for many reasons. This can be the fact that they're different currencies, they're different market drivers, they're different risk profiles, etc. And we'll explore this a little bit further in the presentation. You may also be looking for a bit more stability in your portfolio, and the developed markets really don't experience as much volatility as we do in emerging markets, particularly with our current political uncertainty and policy uncertainty. And then of course there's the protection against some exogenous and endogenous domestic risks. So let's readdress a concept that was brought up in one of the previous learning sessions, the concept of inflation. This is your number one enemy for a domestic portfolio. This is the main detractor against achieving your investment objective. The old faithful 1.3 litre City Golf was launched at a price of 7,600 Rand, inflating to a retail price of 113,000 Rand in 2009. That's an inflation rate of 11% per year. So you need your investment to at least accommodate for this level of inflation. So let's look at offshore goals. With offshore goals and offshore investing, you still face the problem of inflation, as depicted in the chart. The tuition fees at Yale University over the same period as the example with the City Golf inflated by 13% in Rand terms, which is slightly more, but it is comparable to the example of the Golf. This connection or this alignment in price of products and services in any currency is called purchase power parity. Products across the world will generally reprice to an equivalent value over the longer term. And this is sometimes known as the Big Mac index, which compares the cost of a Big Mac in different countries but converted to a common currency like the US dollar. But if you look at the next 6 years, so for example, if you had to pay your kids' education in December 2015 when Nhlanhla Nene was fired, the inflation that you would have been faced with as a consequence of the rapid depreciation of the Rand suddenly jumps up to 17% per annum, to an amount of 924,000 Rand per year for your tuition. This is something that you cannot afford. So for offshore goals, we are protecting ourselves against inflation, and we're also protecting ourselves against the exchange rate risk or exchange rate volatility. And it is much better to match your investment in the same currency as that of your goal. I think it would be useful to discuss some examples at this point. So let's discuss some very obvious examples. Let's consider your wish to send your child to university in the United Kingdom in 10 years' time. How do you save for this goal? So I think Errol alluded to the fact that there are a number of ways that you can do this. The first option is via a domestic investment. It's very familiar, you know what you're dealing with. It's nothing different to the rest of your portfolio, and we can simply add to one of your gold standard accounts, for example. But this is a goal that we don't want to jeopardize. You really don't want your genius child or my genius child to miss out on their opportunity to be educated at an offshore university. and we cannot allow for a potentially weak rand to impact on this goal. So let's look at another option. The next option is to invest in a pound-linked investment via an asset swap or a feeder fund. This is where you place your rands with Standlib, for example, and it as an institution on your behalf uses the asset swap capacity to invest in an offshore investment. This at least matches your currency, but we still face political risk because your money, your personal money, is still physically in South Africa. In addition, you will be charged capital gains tax on the capital gains of the investment, both in pounds, plus the potential depreciation of the rand over the period that you were saving. We'll explore this in a little bit more detail later. Then the third possibility is actually transferring single or recurring amounts via your 1 million discretionary allowance, so physically transferring them offshore, or applying for up to your 10 million tax clearance if you can afford this in a particular year. There are many benefits to this approach, notably that you won't be subject to the negative CGT impact as a result of the depreciation of the ZAR. We do acknowledge, though, of course, that the investment universe overseas is overwhelming. But this is, of course, where we are able to help you. Let's look at another example, and let's look at another example closer to home. What if your wish was to purchase a house in Mauritius, whether this is for holiday purposes or to secure a residency offshore? These apartments and houses are generally available in US dollars or euros, and they are in many cases affordable, but some careful financial planning, of course, would be required. As per the previous example, we could invest in a familiar, your domestic market via gold standard, for example. You do expose your plans to the vulnerability of the rand in the current environment. So, of course, it would make more sense to invest in the same currency as the investment that you're looking at, which is US dollars. So let's consider the second option, which is investing via an asset swap in a feeder fund available from your domestic product provider. This is a very easy option, but if your concern includes policy uncertainty in South Africa, you are not completely protecting yourself from this risk. In addition, as explained in the previous example, you will pay CGT on your capital gains related to the investment product performance, as well as the potential depreciation of the rand. And then finally, we could physically transfer the investment funds offshore via your discretionary allowance, the 1 million per annum, or obtain a tax clearance to transfer up to 10 million per annum. Feasibly, this money could be invested via a trust or another platform in Mauritius in a USD-based fund. Your funds will be external from South Africa and consequently immune to any political or policy risk. The capital gains will be calculated on your US dollar capital gains, and you have the option of translating these back to rands at the reporting date. And this might be difficult to explain in the current example, so let's go into a bit more detail on this exact example. The difference in capital gains between investing in an asset swap or investing in an offshore, a totally offshore investment. And at this point, I must explain that I'm not a tax advisor. So the following explanation of the capital gains tax treatment is not intended to be tax advice, but it's merely factual information that illustrates the CGT treatment of assets acquired and disposed of in a foreign currency. When an asset is disposed of by an individual in a foreign currency, capital gains or losses must be calculated. The question is whether the fluctuation of the currency will have an effect on the taxation of the foreign asset upon disposal. This is the big question. Is your foreign currency depreciation included in that CGT calculation? All South African residents are taxed on the worldwide income and as such liable for taxation in South Africa. So the first option here would be where we purchase an asset swap in rand and it is ultimately disposed of in foreign currency. This is known as your asset swap foreign investment. The investor will pay tax on the capital gain that includes a possible depreciation of the rand. So let me say that again. You pay capital gains tax on both the physical capital gains in dollar terms and the depreciation of the rand. And in this example, we invest 1,000 rand at a point in time, and it's a very simplistic example, so please excuse the exchange rates, but at a point in time where the US dollar rand exchange rate was 10 rand to the dollar. So we receive $100 of asset swap investment. Over time, the capital gains of the investment is $20, as you can see on the chart. And then we sell the asset swap for $120 at a point where the rand-dollar exchange rate is 20 rand to the dollar. So we receive 2,400 rand for our investment. We're faced with a capital gain that is physically related to the dollar-related capital gain of 400 rand at the time of disposal, but we also have a gain related to the depreciation of the currency of 1,000 rand. In this example, your capital gain and the tax will be based on that full amount of 1,400 rand. If we look at the next example, which is physically investing offshore, some significant tax changes were brought about with effect from 1st March 2013. And to simplify matters, one can state that where an asset is purchased in a foreign currency, the gain will only be translated to rand upon the date of disposal. This will be the case where monies are invested directly offshore, making use of the exchange control allowance. So again, let's use this example to paint how this works. At a point in time, we invest 1,000 rand when the rand dollar is 10 rand to the USD. We transfer the money to an offshore bank account using our discretionary allowance, and then we invest it into a fund. We then benefit from a $20 capital gain over time, as you can see. And we eventually sell the investment for $120 at a time when the exchange rate is 20 rand to the dollar. The capital gains tax will only apply to the capital gains that has appreciated in US dollars, and then that capital gain is translated to rand at the date of disposal. So the $20 capital gain will be translated back to rands at an exchange rate of 20 rand to the dollar, which equates to 400 rand capital gain. This is vastly different to the 1,400 capital gain that you experienced with your asset swap example. Of course, there might be examples where a direct investment is made offshore and the rand appreciates against the dollar. And in this case, the commercial gain, or stated differently, the capital profit may be reduced, maybe less as a result of that adjustment. So let's readdress the asset classes, and we look at offshore within the context of the different asset classes. Of course, offshore investments can be any one of the listed asset classes, but the behavior of offshore investments is generally different to those in the South African-based version for many, many reasons. These can include different currency movements, different economic forces. Our interest rate cycle might be moving in the opposite direction to the US, for example. We look at different countries. Some are importers, some are exporters, and each country has got different risks that they're faced with, and that influence what happens in the currency. So with this in mind, let us readdress the previous learning session's message on risk and return. Model portfolio theory teaches us that investors are able to find the best mix of assets by evaluating the asset class, so either cash, bonds, property, equity, etc., on the basis of their risk return and correlation profile. Let's see how offshore investments perform within this context. So as was mentioned previously, generally asset classes offer an investor different levels of return to account for the different levels of risk inherent in each asset class. The higher the return, the higher the risk, and vice versa. Correlation is the measure of the return behavior of each asset class compared to one another. and a low correlation will result in a lower risk within a portfolio where the asset classes are blended together. Generally, offshore investments have a low correlation to domestic investments and can consequently add value to the portfolio by reducing its risk. The benefit, of course, is known as diversification. If you select a portion of offshore investments, whether it's equity, cash, or bonds, it will enable you to maintain the same level of return as is shown in the example in the slide, but it will substantially reduce the risk of the portfolio. Diversification using different asset classes, I think, has been explained before, but diversification using offshore investments is really explained on in the slide of the man on the tightrope. We want to create a balance in our investment portfolio, such that a wobble in one class, such as domestic equity, won't destabilize our financial plans. And if we include offshore goals in these financial plans, we have to make sure that we match our asset classes to include offshore investments as well. So to explain this again, and using the previous example of the asset classes as football players, we look at the same portfolio with a goal to beat inflation by 6%. If you remember correctly, in order to achieve this goal, we had to add more attackers, which are equity, and take away some of the defense and midfield players, which are the bonds asset class, or depicted as bonds or asset class. You will have a more volatile portfolio, of course, but you will be able to score more goals, and this enables you to achieve your target of CPI plus 6%. So let's have a look if we add some international equity. So it's the same asset class, equity, but we are adding offshore equity to the portfolio. We would effectively, in this scenario, or using this analogy, we would be replacing one of our attackers with one or two additional defenders or midfielders, thus reducing the risk related to the portfolio, but still achieving the same level of return, CPI plus 6, as compared to the domestic portfolio. And this is because offshore equity has a low correlation to domestic equity. So it reduces, because of diversification, it reduces the risk of the portfolio. So if you had invested, say, 100 Rand of each of the various asset classes in 1995, let's see how your money performs. Again, I'm re-looking at an example that was shown in the previous learning sessions. So we showed 100 Rand in cash, 100 Rand in bonds, 100 Rand in equity. You can see that equity is exposing you to a lot more volatility, but is certainly giving you, over the long term, a better return. A diversified portfolio gives you a smoother version of this. And then we have a look at what foreign equity looks like. So the interesting thing is that its performance is not, in the long run, it doesn't give you a substantially higher outcome than domestic equity. But the one thing that you can notice, with the exception of the global financial crisis in 2008, it clearly, the behavior of offshore equity is different to domestic equity. Some of this is explained by the volatility in the Rand, but there are many other reasons, as those examples that I mentioned earlier, different economic forces, etc., etc. So when we sit in this wonderful country of ours and we're faced with our own domestic goals, those things that we want to achieve, we're also faced with very, very real offshore-based ambitions and offshore goals, offshore needs. We may want to diversify and reduce our domestic risks. We may be worried about the rising cost and dollar-based cost of healthcare. We may want to ensure an offshore tertiary education for our children. And we may even want to secure a property in a place like Mauritius. But this can be very, very overwhelming. However, this complex environment that we live in really does require a global approach to setting your goals, to your goal-based philosophy. And this is really where we can help you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you so much, Earl, as well, for your time. We're just going to check if there's any questions that popped up during the presentation. All right. Okay, that was just someone having a connectivity problem. Okay, so far I think no questions. I think the presentation was clear and well received. Errol, I hope you're still there. Thank you very much for your time. Greg, thank you very much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any other questions that you think of at a later stage, you will get a thank you note with an email address that you can send to. If you'd like to see a financial planner because this has now inspired you to look at Offshore, you can walk into any Standard Bank branch. There are financial planners sitting in every branch. And there'll be a thank you note as well that comes through tomorrow. The thank you note will have an SMS line where you can send an SMS and then we can get a financial planner to phone you or make an appointment with you, as well as a YouTube link. So we record the sessions and we post them on YouTube for our customers, and then for our internal staff members, the planners, the managers, this will be on your SPFC portal for you to view at any stage as well. I hope this was clear. We've got a positive feedback there from Graham Farrington saying thank you, very interesting presentation. We appreciate your feedback, Graham. We agree, I agree. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this was well spent. If there is any other webinars coming up, look out for the invites. They'll be sent soon, probably in July. Until next time, thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. Till then.